If you watch my channel, you know that I'm a huge BMW M3 fan. As a matter of fact, I've owned this manual 2017 M3 competition for almost 4 years now, and this is the car that sort of launched my YouTube career, or career if you will. I've done a lot of DIY videos on it. I've taken this car to the track. I use it as a family hauler. It's a great all-arounder. Then I developed an itch that I couldn't scratch, and I had to get a Porsche. Now, there are a couple of options I looked at, and I decided that a mid-engine car is the right choice for me, especially since I have a car already that has back seats. So I ended up with this 2015 Porsche Cayman S, also with a manual transmission. And today I'm going to compare the two to highlight some of the differences and similarities between these two vehicles. We'll take them for a test drive, and I'll give you my real-time impressions. And this is the first impression. Look how much lower the Porsche is compared to the M3. I'm not talking about the suspension, I'm talking about the whole vehicle. It's about almost maybe a foot lower than the M3. Let's talk performance. This twin-turbo inline-six produces 444 horsepower, although in my case, it's a little more since I did a couple of upgrades to it. And under the hood of this car, oh yeah, that's a frunk. And under the trunk of the, oh wait. Under this cover, you have to trust me, there's an engine, and it's a flat 6 producing 325 horsepower. But despite the horsepower difference, the M3 is nearly 1,000 pounds heavier than the Cayman, which means the power to weight ratios are fairly similar. Let's talk practicality. The M3 has a pretty sizable trunk, whereas the Cayman has a trunk, a little shelf, and of course a frunk that is very deep. You can install a roof rack on this car to transport your bikes or your snowboard, skis. You can also transport your kids in the back quite comfortably. When it comes to the Cayman, a roof rack is a no-no, but a baby seat is a yes, only if it's a front-facing booster seat. You can only fit one unless you want the other child to drive. Getting into the Cayman is quite an ordeal, but once you're in, you are absolutely comfortable. You feel like you're cocooned by these fairly comfortable and fairly huggy seats. You sit extremely low, the steering wheel is right in front of you, and even though you don't have a heads-up display, you have this tack right in the middle that tells you also the speed and what gear you're in, so it feels like you're in a real cockpit. And getting into the M3 feels a lot more relaxed. Yes, I used to think this car felt very low, but now that I sit in it, it actually does feel a lot higher. But the seating position is also very comfortable. The steering wheel is also not as straight in front of you, but it gives you a lot of confidence. The display's a little bit farther away from you, and you have this domed hood, which sort of gives you a very powerful feeling. And when it comes to the overall looks, I think that's fairly subjective. Some say that the M3 looks very aggressive. Some say that the Cayman looks very mild. But again, looks are fairly subjective. Both cars are lowered, both cars have spacers, so they both look a bit more aggressive compared to their stock counterparts. It's quite actually interesting to see how much lower the M3 is compared to the Cayman. And yes, obviously I put a lip on the M3 and the Cayman doesn't have a lip. It's got the original OEM one. But I mean, the difference is vast, which makes the Cayman for a lot more comfortable daily driver. And before we take these cars for a test drive, let's hear what the cold start sounds like. Now, to be fair, my M3 has a tune on it with a cold start delete, so it's not gonna rumble really loud for the first couple of minutes. The Porsche is completely stock, so it'll sound a little louder. We're going to start off with the Cayman first, and I'm not going to talk about technology because when I was searching for this Cayman, I wanted it to be as bare as possible for two reasons. One, I wanted to be able to add any options that I thought were important myself, such as the Sport Chrono. I did a DIY on it, but at the same time I wanted as few options as possible because I wanted the car to be as light as possible, which is why we don't have a stereo, which is why we have two-way manual seats and no extended leather, nothing. This is almost as base as they come. But even though it's a base model, it actually feels fairly premium inside. So now let's take it for a spin. First thing you notice is the clutch is very, very heavy, and it sort of bounces back very quickly. It takes a while to get used to it, but once you get used to it, you wonder how you ever lived without it. The shifter, this is a short shifter from a GT4. That was one of the first upgrades I made, and I've got to say, it is a fantastic shifter. The way it clicks into place, it's like no other shifter. So, before we also set off, one major thing that really bugs me about the interior of this car is the lack of a manual handbrake. I am really not used to using the electronic handbrake, but that is the future, so that's something I really have to get used to. But enough of my talking, let's take it for a spin. Heel and toe, it's easy. All right, setting off in my 2015 Cayman S with a manual. First test will be the acceleration test. Okay. As you can tell, the car is plenty fast. It is plenty loud, even though it is going to be louder. I do have an exhaust coming for this car, but it is an absolute blast. You only have 325 horsepower and I think 270-ish pounds-feet of torque, but the way you put down the power in this car is a lot more efficient. You rev it up, so it's you're sort of gradually applying the power, whereas with the M3 you're just sort of, it's like smashing you with a hammer. You kind of just go for it. But anyways, that's about the acceleration. When it comes to handling, this car handles like it's on rails because I am running the OEM X73 suspension, which has lowering springs, upgraded shocks, and upgraded sway bars. So the car feels very planted, and the beauty of having a mid-engine car is the fact that it turns so well. Think of an ice dancer. An ice dancer, when he or she wants to do a spin, they put their hands close together and they spin faster. The same idea goes with a mid-engine car. Because of the fact that the engine is in the middle, the car can turn a lot better, a lot faster. Now, is it a night and day difference? No. But it just feels like a much more fun experience, and you are not necessarily concerned about the car getting away from you as much as you are with the M3. And again, heel and toe, super easy. So much fun. And overall, driving this car does feel very special. Not that I care about looks, but this car gets a lot more looks compared to the M3. Even though the M3 is in this loud blue color, this one definitely gets a lot more attention. If that's your thing, obviously. Setting off in the M3, first thing you notice is how much roomier it is compared to the Cayman, and you do have a manual handbrake, which I absolutely love. The brakes feel a bit more spongier, but the biggest difference, seriously, the biggest difference is the clutch. Pressing this clutch feels like it's broken when you just get out of the Cayman. It's so light, it actually comes back a lot slower. I guess the spring is not as hard as it is on the Cayman. And you do sit a bit higher. Even though my seat is in the lowest position, you do feel elevated. No need to heel and toe because this has auto rev matching. Let's test the acceleration of this car. Okay, as you can see, the acceleration in this one is a lot more violent. The car, even though the traction control is an MDM, so it's limited, it's not fully off, but allows me for some play. There was a lot of wheel spin. Now, granted, I am running my winter tires, which are only 255 wide in the back, but the car struggles for grip. Another thing you notice right away as you enter this turn is how much floaty the car is compared to the Cayman. It's bizarre. I used to think this car was so nimble until I got a chance to own and experience a mid-engine car. And again, I'm splitting hair over here, but the way you turn here, so you turn and the car sort of takes its time. It takes a split second, but the front leans, then the back leans. It feels sort of, I hate to say it, but kind of disconnected. Whereas with the Cayman, it feels like one fluid motion. You turn and the whole car turns. With this one, it's slightly more sort of on the wobbly side, if you will. Again, very, very capable car, extremely fun. I'm just comparing it to the two-seater mid-engine car that I also own. I don't want to sound like I'm whining, but I'm just being honest. This shifter now feels spongy. This shifter now, when you really get on it, I actually missed a couple of gears. It's not as direct. The clutch now feels too light. It's just, I don't know. Now I feel the turbo lag. What is going on? Seriously, before I drove the naturally aspirated engine, I didn't think this car had a turbo lag. But now when I get on it, I feel it. It's crazy. You see? Ooh. It takes a second for the car to get going, whereas with the naturally aspirated engine, you just sort of, you put it in gear, and if you're in the optimal rev range, you just go. It's crazy. Look, let's try this again. Second gear, let's bring it down to 3,000 RPM. So yeah, the car pulls like a train. It definitely pulls, but there's a lag. Now, is it a deal breaker? No, but that's the difference between a naturally aspirated engine versus an engine that's twin turbocharged. So much more violent. You feel the front pushing as you turn, which is something I never noticed in the past. But you do have a lot more power to get you out of these turns, which is why I suspect that the Cayman at the track will be a completely different type of fun. I'm curious to see how the times will compare. Obviously, I'll shoot a video to show you exactly how that does compare. And we're back. Now, at the end, I know a lot of you will ask me the following question. Given just one choice, which one would you take? Would it be the M3 and would it be the Cayman? And the answer might surprise you, but it will be neither. That's right. If I were to only have one car, it would be neither of those. I think it would be a 911. As much as I love the M3 and as much as I love how capable it is, there's just something missing from it if you want just one vehicle to do it all. Now, I'm lucky because I can have both. I can have this and I can have one really, really capable vehicle, one that's not necessarily as practical. But if I were to choose one, I'm pretty sure it will be a 911 because it's got back seats so I can pick up my kids from daycare, and that's really all that matters to me when it comes to practicality. I can put a roof rack on it so I can take it snowboarding. I can get it in all-wheel drive, which I probably wouldn't, but I would absolutely stick with a manual transmission. But we talk about hypothetical situations. In this case, I am not doing anything. I am keeping my M3 and I am keeping my Cayman. I am gonna have fun with both of them. I have a lot of track days planned for this car this year, and I'll document some of them. We're gonna do a lot of track day prep videos and all of that. And I also have a lot of fun scheduled with this car, and by that I mean I'm going to be taking my kids to daycare, and we're going to be taking weekend trips. I will not be taking this car to the track this year. It'll take it easy, but soon we're going to be swapping out for my summer tires, so that'll make for an interesting video. And speaking of interesting videos, I hope you found this video somewhat interesting, and if you did, consider giving me a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, and why don't you tell me, if you were in my situation, what would you do? Would you keep the 2, or would you just get a 911? Anyways, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Under the hood of this straight 6, under the hood of this inline 6 lies this twin turbo inline 6 this inline 6